is how I would inspect a turbo. First off, look into this housing and you want to spin it. Make sure it's not touching the sides of it. You also want to like push up on it and spin it, and push down on it and spin it. Make sure it's not contacting the housings of the turbo. Sometimes you can see that inside. You can see little scratches where the wheel is hitting the housing. That's bad. Now some play is okay in these. Some up and down play. What you really don't want to see is in and out play. Now there are specifications for that, and you can use a dial indicator to test that. This particular turbo or machine has 2 turbos, but the other thing I would check is for oil. Anywhere on in this turbo, you don't want to see oil residue in the compressor side, which is this side. This is your air intake from your filter, and this is your compressor side, which is actually being fed into the compressor side of the other turbo on this particular engine. And this is your exhaust side of this particular setup, which would have been fed exhaust from this turbo over here, which is attached to the exhaust manifold. But either way, you don't want any oil in the exhaust side or the compression side or compressor side of a turbo. Oil can mean that the seals are bad inside here. If you find oil in the exhaust housing, sometimes that can mean that you have leaky valve seals or a leaking oil ring in one of your pistons. That's coming through this turbo. And through this turbo, obviously oil on the exhaust side could be from obviously either the engine exhausting it or from the turbo. But if you have oil in the compressor side, 90% of the time it's going to be from your turbo and your turbo seals. So oil is a good thing to check for. The other thing you can check is if your engine is burning coolant, you will have like a whitish dust that you can find inside your turbo housings for your exhaust. If you find this whitish dust, it usually means it's probably burning coolant. But usually the main failures you see with turbos is the seals go bad and they start leaking oil, or your shafts start locking up. If your shafts are not properly lubricated, they can lock up, or if they're not getting proper oil flow, which I'll talk about that in a minute. The oil lubrication, this is your inlet on this turbo for your oil, your lubrication for your turbo bearings, and there's the outlet down there. You want to make sure you're getting adequate oil to this, and you also want to make sure you're cooling down. I don't care if it's a truck, piece of equipment, whatever, cool down your engine for at least 30 seconds before you shut it off after you ran it. And this is why. If you're cruising down the interstate at 75 miles an hour in your pickup and you pull off to the side and you just shut it off, it's still hot in here. Your exhaust runs anywhere from, on average at highway speeds, anywhere from like 800 to, if you're really pulling hard, 1300 degrees. Your EGTs. So, and that's what the temperature of your turbo bearings. This shit's aluminum in here. So be careful with the temperatures. But when you shut it down, the reason why it's important to cool it down is so your oil doesn't bake. The reason your oil isn't baking while it's running at those temperatures is because it's a constant flow. The second you shut that flow off and there's just oil sitting in there, it will actually bake and start caking inside your turbo bearings, and that can lead to failure. Okay, so now that we are back over by my toolbox, I have some parts to show you from failed turbos. This is the first one. Doesn't really look abnormal to the normal person, but that used to be attached to a shaft. In this particular case, I believe the shaft locked, the bearing ceased. This just wasn't secured good enough, just came off. This was on a loader engine that I did a long block on, and when I went to take the turbo off to swap it onto the long block, I found this actually just chilling in the exhaust pipe. Like there's a turbo pipe and then like your turbo housing, and then there's a little section of pipe before it went up. That's what this was hanging out in. It wasn't even in the, it was like, wasn't even remotely attached to the turbo shaft at all. I'm shocked this didn't cause more problems, but it didn't, shockingly. Second thing I want to show you is this little guy. This used to be a turbo. So this came out of a, I don't remember if it was an L or a K series backhoe. I believe it was L. This is what happens when you don't have proper lubrication in your turbo. This is one of 3 pieces that I pulled out of the compressor side of this particular engine. Obviously you can see it's not sooted, so it's from the compressor side. What I ended up finding when I had obviously replaced the engine, it was under warranty, but DTAC wanted me to check the torque on the oil pump nut. Apparently from the factory, some of them are not torqued quite correctly. So what I did was I took the engine out, took the oil pan off, and you can see little indentations on the oil pumps where they tried to like stamp lock the nut on. You can do that where you smash some of the threads into the nut on the shaft, and it's supposed to lock the nut on, which none of that had slipped loose. But if you take your torque wrench and you torque it to specification, it actually moves just ever so slightly tighter. It wasn't actually torqued correctly, and the reason that Deere figured this out is one particular person had, they did like 4 or 5 turbos on the same machine, and turns out it was supplying just enough oil pressure to lubricate everything, but the turbo is the last in line on these particular motors, and it was starving it, not enough to cause immediate failure, but just enough to cause a failure after failure after failure of this turbo. Like I said, I found this in like 3 pieces. This thing, the shaft broke off, and it was actually shooting oil out the exhaust, like geyser of oil out the exhaust. So yeah, that is my turbo diagnostics for you guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. Hey guys, just reminding you to go check out my Instagram, the.diesel.queen on Instagram. That is my one and only account, so go check it out. I have links to all kinds of other stuff in my profile, so go check me out. With all the numbers of fake accounts that have been popping up as me, make sure that you follow the one with the profile picture that has a little blue check mark in it, and that is me. If it is an account that has over 60,000 followers, that is me. I do not have any other accounts, so again, the.diesel.queen.